So it's nearly Shakespeare's birthday. You didn't expect me to open up to that, did you?
Okay, yeah.
I was trying to think, how does that tie in? How can we tie that into what we do? So stick with me. So I thought we need to come up with a podcast that's relevant to business that is some way linkable to Shakespeare, so we can get the cheesy theme pushed out onto our social media to say that we've done something for Shakespeare's birthday, 23rd of April.
We should be, maybe rather than having a beer, we should be maybe raising a glass of mead.
Oh, mead. And we should be in appropriate costume.
A costume. Oh, there we go. Missed the trick.
Suited like the bard. You would have loved that. Dressed up as the bards.
Loved it. So
Bards indeed.
You're going to have to get some music on here that's not the usual kind of 80s vibe, but
yeah, absolutely. It's helpful we've got 80s vibe.
1580s. A lute.
Very good.
Do they have a harpsichord then? I don't know. I'm not really
yeah, you don't know. The right music anyway. We'll ask somebody in research to work that one up for us.
Absolutely.
So we need some Shakespeare music. So we're going to try and, here we go. This is the challenge we've set ourselves. How to come up with a business relevant subject in the style of something referring to Shakespeare.
AKA the Bard.
The Bard. Okay, shall we go?
Bard from this podcast.
Shall we go?
Let's go.
Okay. So hello and welcome to this week's SME Growth Podcast with me, Dave Parry, and him, Richard Buckle.
Not the Bard.
Not the Bard. So if you've listened to that little wacky intro, we're trying to do a growth-related podcast today linked to Shakespeare because it's his birthday. So we thought we'd refer to As You Like It, famous Shakespeare play, in which there is a monologue, which some of you may have heard of, called The 7 Ages of Man. And I'm going to spare that for now, but maybe there'll be some bonus content later on that talks about it. But he talks about the 7 Ages of Man in terms of the various evolutionary steps that a human being takes from very young to very old. And we thought, right, let's try and compare the evolution of a company to that stages of man. And I know it's actually more sensible than it sounds perhaps, but I end up having this discussion a lot, and I know you do too, where we're in companies that we're advising and helping and so on. And there are pinch points in the growth of a company.
Yeah.
Growth isn't a linear thing.
No.
And you can do 10, 20, 30% more than you're doing today with pretty much the same type of people, if maybe not exactly the same number, same structures, the same systems. But if you go to double it, treble it, quadruple it, you're going to move into a different territory.
It's like stretching an elastic band, isn't it? So you can stretch an elastic band so far, and then at some point it's no longer fit for purpose. So you need a bigger elastic band. You need a bigger, it's maybe that's not quite the right analogy, but it's about that transition between different stages of growth, isn't it?
And I was having this sort of discussion to a client last week, and I described this situation as being a bit like in the adolescence phase as a human. Lots of things are changing, you're changing, the environment's changing and all that. And I was trying to say that that's the stage they're at with their management team. And I tried to draw a pretty, clumsy metaphor to try and work it out. And that's what prompted the idea for this sort of discussion, because there is one of the 7 stages of man that relates very closely to that. So that's what I thought. Do you think we can pull this off?
Let's have a go.
This is one of our more challenging themes for a podcast. So it goes. So shall I quickly run through what the 7 stages are? I'll set this up.
I think that'd be useful because I don't know.
Well, I can't say I've committed to memory all of the opening monologue from Act 2, Scene 7 of As You Like It. But the 7 stages are infant, so we can all get their heads around that. Schoolboy, so slightly older. Shakespeare calls it lover, but he really means teenager, that sort of age in their teens. Soldier is the next one he comes up with, so you can imagine, early 20s, in their 20s, peak of physical fitness, fighting away. And then justice is what he calls the next bit, which we'd probably call middle-aged, someone who's a bit of a know-it-all, a bit more wizened and life experienced. And then we're moving a bit more into old age, which he calls pantaloon, but he means old age, someone who's starting to be dependent on others. And then finally, he draws the loop back to almost a second childhood, because when you get so old, you're so dependent on others, dribbling in the corner, that actually you're not much better than an infant again. So that's how he draws the arc. Okay. So wherever listeners are, they're probably somewhere sat in either soldier, justice, or pantaloon, and you can make your own judgment.
I can't help but think, as I just casually glance at the actual poem or act,
the monologue,
monologue, that when he's talking about the justice, he says, "The justice in fair round belly and with cap on lined, with eyes severe and a beard of formal cut." I don't know who he is.
I don't know who he can refer to, but he was definitely 450 years ahead of his time, wasn't he? Like you met. Perfect.
Oh, there we go.
So we shall have to weave in the Shakespearean descriptions of these various characters as we describe this arc of a company of orbit. And there, as I say, there is a serious side to this, because it's not so much about identifying where you're at as much as knowing how far you are away from the next transition, because it's the transitions that get you. And we've seen this time and time again in companies, and you'll know of it, even if it's not your company, it'll be someone you know, where they seem to be doing okay, and they either stayed still for too long or they grew without making the appropriate adjustments, and it all started going wrong. And the wrong conclusion, I think, to draw from that is that it's not wrong to grow. It's wrong to grow without realizing that at some point of growth, you can't just carry on in a straight line. You have to change some things. Yeah. So some people respond to it by saying, "Oh, I'm going to stay where I am. It's better off just staying as my little £2 or £5 million company because that's safer." Well, it's only safe in the sense that you don't have to change, but everybody around you is, and they're going to come and overtake you, and you'll lose market share or people or whatever, or products some other way. So I think it's those transitions that matter.
Yeah.
So should we try and talk through them, starting with maybe the easy ones?
The easy ones.
Well, an infant is a startup.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone knows about the challenges of running a startup. There might only be one of you, 1, 2, 3 of you. You're really strapped for cash. You've got more ideas and energy than you've got resources to spend. You maybe haven't got enough customers yet. Everything's fresh and new. You don't know who you are. You don't really know where your niche is. You're trying to sell
I suppose
things.
Maybe not everybody listening has been in a startup, but that is a
very good point. Yeah, a lot of people come into a business when it's already established.
So and that's not to say that oftentimes as a business owner, it's almost like if you've not cleaned the toilet or emptied the dishwasher, that's the startup phase.
We both experienced those rubber gloves that we have in the bathroom.
Yeah, there's been a few instances, but it is that all hands on deck phase.
Very hands on, making the team for each other's business.
It's almost like the job titles become pretty irrelevant, really.
You're emptying the bins, you're doing the selling, you're doing the delivering, you're maybe even doing the payroll and VAT returns.
Yeah, it's like so varied. It's like about everything, every single job that needs to be done. Someone's got to do it, but there's only 3 people here.
Yeah.
So,
and all you know is that there's something that you've done which someone else seems to have some value in. It might only be 1 customer, 2 customers, 3 customers, might not be very many, and maybe you're doing a different thing for all of them, so you haven't really quite fine-tuned what it is you do. You just know that generally you've got something that seems to be going down well.
Yeah.
And you're almost waiting to be taken along on the wave to see where's this going to take me, which bits of the market are going to open up. But like an infant, you're just wide-eyed, anything's possible. You know, it's a blank canvas almost, and it's very confusing, but very exciting and dynamic.
But I think as well, as we're going to be referring to these labels as analogies, but like an infant is quite vulnerable as well.
Mewling and puking in his mother's arms.
Quotes.
Always nurses.
Quotes thrown in nurses, yeah. But no, like an infant is very vulnerable. And I think that at that stage of a company's development, how many startups don't make it? We've had startups that haven't really, fulfilled their potential.
Well, that's right. And I suppose we have an unusual perspective on this compared to people who are listening already in established businesses, that even though we are now an established business, we were once a startup. But along the way, we've created other startups. Yeah. We've spawned a number of other companies, and one of them lives and thrives to this day in the shape of Magic Minutes, a software company, and others we've tried that we talk less about, and maybe they fell by the wayside. But it's made us more rounded people to have been through the trials, the slings and arrows of misfortune, maybe. the trials and tribulations of trying to get a company off the ground. Okay, so that's infant. Now there's a transition next into the schoolboy phase. So the schoolboy is a variation of that, but it is more grown up. There are more of you for a start. You maybe now have half a dozen people around you. You've got a regular enough income. You're probably VAT registered. You're having to worry about recruiting to replace leavers. There's just a bit more real stuff coming in, but you're still not quite sure who you are. You're still trying to find your identity. Your brand's probably changing every now and again as you're not quite sure how to present yourself, how to sell yourself, how to quote work, how to price it. It's all still very experimental, isn't it?
Yeah, still evolving. It's still kind of, like you say, you haven't got the time to put too many systems in because you're too busy still trying to survive in that way. Maybe not quite maybe survive in the same way that you are as an infant, but you are, maybe you've got a bit of cash reserve. Maybe you are, a bank would take you a bit more seriously, for example, if you need a bit of funding.
Yeah.
You're a little bit more grown up, but it's still, you're still, like you say, working out, well, how do we sell? And you may be falling into that trap of just chasing any sale.
Yeah, but that's certainly one of the traps.
Confidence there.
Because that's the behaviour you learned as an infant stage.
Yeah, anything that comes in,
anything, you pay me when you do it. So you haven't quite got the maturity yet to say no or to be choosier about stuff, that's for sure. And you're probably still clinging to lots of the very make, do and mend ways of doing stuff as a startup, even to the point where you're still taking the bins out instead of hiring a cleaner. These are things that as you grow up, you just got to accept happen.
Yeah.
Some of the reporting requirements, or just some of the way people, like I say, VAT, or making payroll work and so on. You've just got to accept that you will have to change things, and you may be a bit resistant to that.
Yeah,
a bit like the whining schoolboy with his satchel and going unwillingly to school. I think that phase is distinct from the infant, and that transition we see less often because usually we meet people in a more advanced stage, but we've been through it, and you just have to. Either tell yourself or be told by someone that the part of growing up is to stop doing some things and to start doing other things. It's not an evolution of just doing some more of the same.
I think it's a danger here as well. Like maybe from our own personal experience of you've got an awful lot of things that can distract you at this stage.
Yeah,
because you haven't quite got to that point where it's like, right, we've actually focused in on a product here that we can really. Or service that we really know, that we really understand, that we've really dialed into how it's going to work. We're more, we're coming up with different ideas. Like, we went through, like I say, a number of startups that were probably, in hindsight, something of a distraction at that point. Because you're thinking, well, we've got an opportunity.
Yeah.
We can, and you're still so hands-on the business all the time that you're thinking, well, of course we can do everything. Spin loads of plates and get on with all these things. But
you can't, and we shouldn't have done.
And some of them you live and learn.
We joked, didn't we, that we always used to get attracted by the latest shiny new toy. We were like the magpie, whatever shone, we were drawn to it, moth to a flame, all this sort of thing. So we did lots of things because we were trying. We didn't know what was going to be successful. Any one of those startups could have been the millionaire maker idea, but you don't know until you've tried it. Now, I think now we're probably a bit more worldly wise, and we might have spotted it, but. At that stage, we were definitely in the schoolboy category.
Well, I think you learn through that of how to fail fast, and I think that's a really important. If you are in that stage where you're thinking that we've got a talented team around us, we're small enough, we're agile enough to be able to just like fire off and do things. That's actually it's great, but it also can be really dangerous, really distracting if you're not careful. So you've got to we've got no idea, we want to innovate. How can we fail fast at this?
Yeah.
So that if it doesn't work out, bang,
you're not wasting resources. You just got to learn to say no,
and you learn that over time just by seeing,
you can't teach it. You can't read it in a book, and you've got to experience.
Well, I was talking to someone yesterday who said he rang me up, and I'd spoken to him. He was trying to get me to get on board with a business idea he had around EV about 6 months ago, and he told me the idea, and I was just like, that is never going to work because of bang, 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 bang.
Yeah.
And he just rang me yesterday because I'm so grateful.
Then
you did.
You saved someone.
That you did, that you just turned me off it, having spoken to you, because I just didn't see it. It was a great idea. I thought this was going to be the game changer, and it was just like
realization was dawned thanks to you. Well, we had the same experience with another software product we tried, didn't we? Dedicated to lawyers, and there was a particular regulatory requirement we were trying to help them solve with a legal product. And we fell over for a sort of similar reason in the opposite sense, in that we were given too much positive feedback. We did market research, and all the lawyers we spoke to said, that's brilliant. So we spent a goodly sum developing it. And then they all said, no, I don't really need it really. But you said before that, I thought other people might like it.
Yeah.
Well, don't you? So you've got to be careful. You need honest feedback.
Your market research at that stage.
Yeah, and choose your advisors carefully. Don't just listen to people that want to be nice to you or encouraging. And your relatives are almost, unfortunately, the worst of them.
Oh, yeah,
they will always give you encouragement.
Don't ask your friends or your relatives at that stage about anything.
They don't want to upset you, do they?
So
you don't have many friends then, do you? Very nice.
I haven't got any, really. Yeah, so that was easy. I actually found a packet of mints from that business the other day when I was cleaning out a drawer.
Oh, that one we're talking about.
Found a packet of client balance mints from an exhibition.
That must be 20 years old.
So.
Okay, so we've got to the schoolboy. So the next one up in Shakespeare's Seven Stages of Man is what he calls the lover, which, as I said at the beginning, is what I've always thought of as more the teenager, someone in those late teens years, almost an adult, the tweeners or whatever they call them. And this type of business is almost a company. It's got a lot of the trappings of a company. If it's a man who's starting to grow a beard, it's got a bit of stature, but it's still, under the surface, it's still quite unsure of itself. It's lacking in self-confidence. So in terms of size, we're probably talking about 15, 25 people or something like that. The boss is still very hands-on with everything, still recruiting everybody, still signing off lots of things and making lots of the decisions, probably not delegating very much. But to the outside, it's starting to look like a proper company.
Yeah,
its sales are probably climbing up now, maybe a couple of million or maybe a bit more, and people around it are used to seeing it deliver good work and professional work. And I think I know a few companies in town here that are a bit like this, that they come across as very professional. And then when you meet them and you realise that it's a bit like that swan that looks good on the surface, but their legs are paddling like crazy underneath. So I think that's where you're at with the lover. So the transition between schoolboy and lover, I think, is one that we're going through now or nearing to the end of. I think we've realised a long time ago that we need more systems and more specific roles, and we're putting those in place. But it's very much where we're at now, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so I definitely identify as a good lover.
Does that mean you aren't sighing like a furnace with a willful ballad made to your mistress's brow?
You have to ask Mrs. Buckle. But yeah, no, I think that's, I just can't help myself with these things. I'll be told off after.
You will. I hope Mrs. Buckle listens to these podcasts.
She'll listen to this one.
So I think the challenges for management in this stage, they've got to learn to start to let go.
Yeah.
They've got to develop the art of delegation much more. But they still haven't got enough critical mass that everything will be systemized and established. So a lot of decisions are still going to be taken based on people instinctively knowing what the right thing is to do. So the culture is absolutely critical, as it is throughout the life of a company. But you're more reliant upon it now because you're relying on people to make instinctively the right decisions rather than follow the rules in inverted commas.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most, I don't know, is this the make or break phase for further growth? So if the founder can't get out of that kind of mindset that I've got to be involved in everything, then it's going to be very, very hard to move out of this phase, really, because it's critical here that you're starting to trust the team around you a lot more.
You have to. And I know this may sound self-serving, but whether it's for us or others, I found that the companies that take on some form of external advice to speak that truth to power, because if you're the boss of a 25-person firm, then around you there's lots of people that are looking up to you for that leadership, or the directors generally, and you don't necessarily get as honest a feedback as you should.
Yeah.
And that's where either non-execs or other business advisors really earn their either pint of beer or shilling, depending on what type you've taken on.
Yeah.
And not many companies at this stage are yet ready. If you think about this lover being the teenager, as you and I both did, at 20 you know everything, don't you? Certainly when you get to 30 or 40 you realise how little you knew when you were 20, and indeed still do. But it's very hard to tell a 20-year-old to give them advice and steer them unless they're ready for it. And we know a few that have and have been very successful. And I think that's where these companies run the biggest risk, that they're riding on the wave, they're doing the swan thing and it's looking good outwardly, and they don't even want to admit to enough external people or even their colleagues, sometimes even their spouse, that it's all a little bit woo and a bit wah behind the scenes. They're sort of just about hanging it together.
Yeah.
And maybe they're doing quite well financially, so people are looking up to them for that reason. The business is successful and they've got themselves a nice car or whatever, but it's still very unstable.
Yeah, I think that's the point. You've got to have people at that point who are going to give you that frank feedback about, like you say, you're not going to have maybe enough people in the business that are going to give you that, partly because you're still going to be pretty busy at that stage. Everyone's still, maybe you're starting to specialize in certain areas, but you're probably not going to have a HR manager. You're probably not going to have certain roles that you think of like that's part of a big grown-up company. Yeah, you're
probably just good way of defining it. You've probably started to take marketing more seriously to help. But build the growth engine.
Yeah.
You'll have to come up with some solution around finance, maybe not a finance director or CFO, but maybe you got a pretty reasonable financial accountant or management accountant, internally, and then external advice. So you're starting to build some of those critical functions. You've probably got someone head of sales if they're not the original owner, or if the original owner is in sales and someone to do the delivery, managing the delivery, you need to split that role. So those sort of roles are appearing, but like you say, you haven't got HR managers yet, and IT managers and facilities managers and highfalutin induction processes and health and safety processes.
And maybe this is the start maybe of where the owner or the board, if there is one, a couple of people, it's that kind of, are you on the balcony or are you on the dance floor type of thing? And it's about, that's when that...
And you're right, that starts, but I think that really comes into play in the next one.
Yeah.
So transitioning then from the lover or teenager into your soldier, your 20 or something or other. So full of strange oaths and bearded like the bard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel. Are we quick in quarrel?
We could quarrel.
So your soldier, that's your classic M of the SME, the medium-sized company, 20 to 250 employees. So I know that sounds like quite a wide range, but people go through that reasonably fast, really. The growth of a company from 50 to 200 can happen in a few years. And boy, is that scary. All the extra people, and you're just coping with the facilities you require for that. You may have to move premises and all sorts of systems that suddenly have to grow up very quickly. So you'll definitely somewhere through that journey take on an HR manager, an IT manager, probably health and safety. You've got to start having formal training for first aiders. You might even get unionized at some point through that. You might have to put a canteen in. There's a huge amount of growing up done in those 20-somethings, but it's done now with the maturity of realizing you need to do it, which is something that was missing in the lover, the teenager stage. So you're starting to make it your business now, to build the business for growth rather than doing the business. So now we're definitely off the dance floor and onto the balcony. We're working on the business, not in the business. And we've seen too many business owners, senior leadership teams, reluctant to do that. Their safe space is doing what they've always done. And if perhaps your business is only successful because you're good at doing what you do, to suddenly have to accept that you're good at running a business rather than good at providing the service or the product is a very dangerous step in some people's minds.
I think as well, for many, I've got one particular company in mind where the founder was, as in often cases, doing a lot of the sales, very passionate about the product, and the company grew very, very quickly. But then the systems just weren't really there to help with the growth, and then it was very, very hard to let go of some of those things. And actually trust the team around. And eventually you can find yourself in a situation where you've got this like big beast to feed, but you don't really have much of the supporting infrastructure around it in terms of, particularly, maybe you've got the things like, your ISO and those sorts of things, but things like CRM, which we've talked about previous podcast, how are we communicating? How are people, we would turn up to board meetings and people would be finding out about projects in the board meeting. It's like
pretty crazy.
That's where those sorts of systems, you've got to get that culture in really early, because if you get to that side, that's where it can get scary at that size of company, where all of a sudden you have got these big orders coming in, you have got this high growth, you've got to ramp up recruitment and everything else. But if you haven't got that kind of, we've got this metronome of even how we meet or how we communicate or how we...
all sorts of culture
stuff. Culture really comes in there, I think.
That's right. Whereas before it was needed to help steer the decisions, now it's there to really underpin the growth. And this is where I think we've talked before in previous podcasts about the vision and strategy. A lot of smaller companies think they need to do that because it's just a tick in the box. Now when you get to here, you absolutely...
It's where the rubber hits the road.
And unless you get everybody pointing in the same direction, you've got 100, 200 people making it up as they go along. You've got chaos. So, and you've got to have clear roles and responsibilities, clear reporting structures and meetings, and how you hold people to account. You need performance management. So those that are in the wrong roles can be developed either to be the right role or move elsewhere or even out the company. See, there's a lot of more... This is really grown-up phase now. You're not mucking about.
It's where leadership, I think, becomes really serious, because back in the infant, schoolboy, lover sort of phase, maybe, like as the leader, you're still going to be quite a lot on show. People are going to know you. You'll probably be able to have a conversation with everyone about, how's your kids doing, blah, blah, blah. They're going to see you authentically because they're going to be up close. When you're getting up to these, top end of soldier phase, the likelihood of someone having an interaction with the leader is just going to be it's going to be maybe a passing.
Right. This is the first phase where you probably haven't recruited every single person working for you, and there'll be churn, which is at that number of people. There'll be new starters coming in, every month, if not every week, and you can't. It's easier at the lower end, but to be able to know everybody's name, personal situation, children's names, and so on is harder. So you need to be able to project the values, the vision, the strategy, and everything, as well as taking on all those extra requirements like auditing and all that comes with size. Things like funding starts getting a bit more scary. Yeah, but conversely, you are also getting to the point now where maybe you're of interest to external investors. So once the valuation of the company gets to sort of 10 million plus, so depending on your multiples, you're doing a bit better. You could now start looking maybe for external investment. But that really comes into play in the next stage. So you've got to the top end of M of the SME, the medium-sized company. And I think the way that certainly in the UK the system works, it almost spits you out at that point into this mid-sized, mid-cap, Mittelstand they call it in Germany. And in the UK, there's lots of support for SMEs, lots of grants are only eligible for SME companies, lots of other things happen around an SME. But when you spit out, just because you've got 251 employees, or there's another 2 requirements on turnover and balance sheet and so on, that could kick you out of suddenly being eligible for all this support. And yet you're really only just an older soldier. Yeah. So this next phase is our justice that we talked about earlier on, the one with the fair round belly that we talked about and the beard. Now, this is really where, so you're over 250 employees, you've got a board now. You probably need to have split the chairman and chief exec roles, which you may not have done until this point. If you should have taken governance more seriously already, but you certainly should have done by now, you've got to be very careful that you're making the right decisions, things like risk registers, and you're looking ahead more. And lots of these things, by the way, should be applicable lower down in the evolution of a company, but now it's required more so. You're going to be having to report on things that you never thought you'd have to do. Your modern slavery policy, your gender pay gap reporting, all of these things come into play at this larger stage. And you've got to be prepared to pay some serious money for serious senior team members to run this properly with you and alongside you. Yeah, you definitely at that point going to need a lot more competence around you, and a lot more specialisms, isn't it? So you will need people who can really handle maybe particular regulatory requirements, or there'll be stuff going on you don't even understand. Yeah, and you got to be comfortable with that. Which as a younger company, you've never used to that before. So you've got to cope with the fact that you'll be taking people on that you couldn't interview because you don't know their specialism, their field. The compliance requirements, the technical. And other factors, maybe start to come into it, like we've seen, with some of our clients who are at this stage or maybe even beyond it. All of a sudden your local MP takes an interest. Yeah, true. And the press. And the press take an interest. And the sort of stuff being talked about your company online suddenly gets noticed. So if people are being a bit nasty on Glassdoor or on social media, then that tends to magnify. You're going to get more employee claims for accidents, whereas as a smaller company you probably didn't have because there was some sort of loyalty because of, whatever, a smaller company like the service, they knew it would damage the company. You're now seen as a company that is worth suing because you can afford. Or if you're international, then you start to see, well, are you doing business in countries where, that were once flavour of the month but aren't anymore? Yeah, you got all those issues. All those issues that start happening. So there's quite a transition, isn't there, between the soldier and the justice. It's that really understanding now I'm running a much larger company with a team of specialist people that employ another team of specialist people beneath them. Yeah. And without any of them, this couldn't work. I'm now here purely as either chairman or chief exec to make sure that the governance is in place, keep a clear handle on the vision, and make sure we've got the right team there. Create the vision, build the team. We said that before. And back to that, maybe there's a huge role there in keeping the purpose. Why there'll be a few people there that have been there from the beginning. Yeah, employees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 might still be there. And how do you keep that? Depending on what your business, does it depend on what your business is? Have you got to keep that original ethos there? Yeah. Does it? Sure, it will have changed in the sense, it will have matured, it will have evolved, it will have developed. Yeah. But you've still got to keep the ship pointed in the right direction in terms of all of those. You've got to stay up on the bridge when everybody else is down in the engine room. So then, conscious of where we're at through it, it's still 2 stages to go, but I don't think we really need to or want to dwell too much on them, because the transitions into them is almost going downhill again. So we've been talking about the growth up to this justice phase, this middle age phase where you're in your peak earning power and things are going well. if you go to the next stage, it's starting to go wrong. So the next one is kind of an old age stage, but in Shakespeare's language, it's a pantaloon. And the reason he calls it that, I think, is because you start to become a parody of yourself. Maybe behind your back initially, but you start to get fun poked out of you. You become a caricature of an older, in his terms, person. But in a company, you can see how that can translate, because you won't have adopted new systems, you won't have taken on younger people's ideas, you won't develop new products or gone into new markets. The danger is that you become stagnant and that you don't recruit really senior people who know what they're doing to potentially take your job. Any one of these transitions, but here more than ever, you've got to be aware that you may not be cut out to run a company of 500 people, 1,000 people, 5,000 people in the way that you were when it was a startup at 5, 10 or 15. And the chances are there would have been changes of leadership along the way anyway, perhaps tied into changes of ownership. So this is one where you really don't want to go into it. But if you sense yourself going into this pantaloon old age stage, you've gone on through justice, you're equivalent of the 60, 70-year-old in your terms. You've got to now be very focused on succession planning, leaving the legacy, making sure that the business is well funded and directed in the right direction for growth.
Maybe, or even, thinking about changes of organizational structure, just so that, a lot of this happens when almost maybe you start off in that very, infant phase, everyone's excited, you move through, it becomes very organic, creative, all of those things. You get to the stage of justice where it's, okay, we're big now, we've got to start, maybe some of that creativity starts to dry up a little bit, maybe some of the innovation disappears. It's much more formalized, and you end up in that pantaloon.
And you've probably, to get that size, you've probably developed a few different market specialisms as well. And one of the decisions you might decide to take at this level is to disaggregate and to split up, or maybe to make acquisitions and integrate more vertically. So there's a couple of big strategic decisions here, which are very hard decisions. It may be to kill off bits of the business entirely and fail fast, like you said earlier, but it's a lot harder when there's 100 people in a division compared to when no jobs will be lost, you just stop doing something. So some hard decisions here to avoid going into old age. If you go beyond that, then you're really into trouble, because the Shakespeare's seventh phase is the second childhood. This is where you're dribbling in the corner. You're as much dependent on others now as you were as an infant. The cycle returns back to the beginning, and that was his point of his monologue. And you don't want to go there.
You don't, not by the sounds of it. Just read it. He says it's second childishness and mere oblivion.
Son's eyes,
son's taste, son's everything.
Yeah, you lost it all.
Goes, it's gone. You've probably lost the purpose for why, maybe you just don't even look like.
Well, either the business has failed, or it's been taken on by others and you've been shuffled off out the back door unceremoniously. Didn't get your watch. So you don't want to get into the second childhood phase. This isn't some sort of great rebirth, renaissance. This is you're so dependent on others, you're not, we can imagine what the metaphor looks like as a company. So the trick is really to keep growing, be aware of the transitions up to the point of Shakespeare's justice phase, the middle age, the mature, the responsible, compliance, governance, chief exec and chairman, and all that stuff that we talked about, and not let that drift over. It needs to be continuously renewed, and new leadership, succession planning, all those big systems that small companies try not to even think about. So how do you think we did? Did we tie together a business theme with Shakespeare?
I think so.
I need some.
I feel the
pithy Shakespeare quote.
Feel the need, to be or not to be.
That would do.
Actually, Shakespeare, I know.
Yeah.
To be or not to be, or get a bit dramatic if we went to some Macbeth or something, would it?
We could,
Stick with Hamlet. Get my Shakespeare right here.
Could do, yeah. I mean,
to be or not to be. What's that?
That's I think the Shakespeare. Yeah.
So, yes, is that Hamlet?
Whether it is nobler in the mind, suffer the slings and arrows of misfortune.
It's like a rap battle, but with Shakespeare. Shakespearean quotes.
That'd be a podcast, wouldn't it?
There we go.
Go on then. We've waffled on for way too long. There you go. 7 stages of man as applied to the evolution of a company. And mind the gap. It's the transitions that matter. And just have a little think about where you're at. So, you've been listening to the SME Growth Podcast, and a slightly off-the-wall Shakespearean themed one to celebrate Shakespeare's birthday, 23rd of April. Thanks a lot for listening. Please share and like our podcasts wherever you find them, and tell your business colleagues that sometimes we're worth listening to. Some episodes better than others. And in the meantime, very best of success for your own business. So for those of you that aren't quite as familiar with the Shakespeare monologue at the beginning of Act 2, Scene 7 in As You Like It, I thought thought it might be interesting just to add this in as a bit of bonus content. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the bard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of fall cut, full of wise saws and modern instances, and so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again towards childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything.